Come on, we have a special guest with us and super excited. We've been in a sermon series over the last few weeks just talking about mental health, talking about things like anxiety. Last week we talked about anger, actually how can you fight through anger, cope with anger, and not make destructive decisions. But we thought that it would be really cool to bring in a professional. And what's great about McKenna, can we give it up for McKenna as she just makes her way to the stage? What's great about McKenna is not only is she a licensed family and marriage therapist, but she also is a part of our church. So she's involved, she's here. So if you're ever wondering, hey, maybe you have some extra questions, she's gonna stick around a little bit tonight, but if you come to our church on Sunday mornings, you can talk to her there. But we're also gonna give you guys some resources for mental health, because it's super important. But super excited. Do you have your mic? I forgot to tell you. Your mic, I think, there it is. Awesome. Great. So we're going to do kind of a Q&A. Raise your hand if you sent in a question. I know we sent in some questions last week. Awesome. So we had some questions sent in for McKenna as we continue to just kind of talk about mental health, ways that you can cope with it, ways that you at 12, 13, 17, 18 can cope with anxiety, depression, suicide, things like that. But before we get into that, McKenna, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe what you do, how long you've been doing it, things like that.
Absolutely. So, hi, my name is McKenna, Bay Area native. Go Niners. Well, maybe next year. I heard they lost. Anyway, so I have been a marriage and family therapist for going on 6 years now. I primarily work with people who are like between the ages of 18 to 35-ish, but I do get to I'm blessed to work with teens on occasion. You guys are kind of the best, to be honest. Don't tell other people. Right. And I primarily work with people dealing with anxiety, depression, and recovering from eating disorders. I also work with people who are dealing with relationship issues or dysfunctional family dynamics, because that's all of us. Super excited to be here.
Come on, awesome. I love that. That's all of us. Come on, raise your hand. Just kidding. Don't raise your hand if you have a dysfunctional family. That'd be so sad. Awesome. So the first question that I have, this wasn't one that was sent in, but I wanted to ask, maybe what's something or one of the biggest things that you see students that are struggling with mental health? What is maybe something they all have in common? What's something that you've seen just across the board that students maybe struggle with as they're struggling with their mental health?
So speaking of specific issues I tend to notice? Okay, cool. So what I'm noticing a lot right now for you guys, in just kind of the teens that I do see, I think that every adult here would agree that their teens were a hard time. I mean, that's not a surprise. But you guys kind of have a unique set of struggles. Going through a pandemic, what you're dealing with right now, we're seeing astronomical rates of anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation and eating disorders. It's all just kind of amplifying because we are created to be in relationship with other people, and we are now kind of stuck at home a lot more. And then also with the prevalence of things like social media. You knew I was going to come in with that, I know. I'm the adult that's like, just so you know, there's some downsides to social media. But with that, we're seeing a lot of depression and things like that. So it's a pretty common struggle, and there's a lot of a sense of feeling alone in it. And then the other thing I'll say is we're seeing a lot of self-diagnosing thanks to TikTok. So that is a very real thing. Just be cautious of the information you're getting on social media. And if you're diagnosing yourself with ADHD, according to your TikTok therapist, just word of caution, might not be accurate.
I love that. Yeah, that might not be the best decision to get your information off TikTok. And that makes us sound so old to say that. But
have I lost you already?
Yeah, they're like, wow, let's go back to playing Cup Game. But I love that. So honestly, we had a lot of questions turned in, and one of the main things that students, I feel like, one of the common things that we saw was anxiety. Just students were turning in questions about anxiety. So I guess the first one was, how do I deal with the stress and anxiety? And it was a very specific question of, parents maybe want you to go to a big school, maybe academic pressure. Come on, who's ever had some academic pressure of, hey, my parents want me to get straight A's, and if I get a B, well then bye-bye phone, bye-bye TV, things like that. And that can bring anxiety. That can bring a lot of maybe pressures. So how would you maybe encourage someone to deal with that, or to maybe walk through that when the anxiety maybe is coming from a parent or from a family member?
Absolutely. Yeah, so one thing I want to preface with a lot of these questions, mental health is a very gray area situation, just meaning there's a lot of nuance. And so a lot of what I'm going to be answering is how to think about these things as well as some coping skills, but I wish I could, this question in particular, I was praying a lot about how to answer. You guys, I just want to start by validating. You guys are in one of the most competitive areas in the country. I was reading a case study on school pressure for teens, and Akalani's was the case study. So that's in Lafayette, you guys. So I just want to throw out there that you guys kind of deal with a disproportionate amount of that pressure. So I think there's a couple different things. If you have a family that's receptive to conversation, I'd be very curious to know if they know how the pressure is impacting you. Is that something that you could say using a lot of I feel language, right? Like, I'm feeling a lot of pressure. It's impacting me this way. Some families are very receptive and open to working with you on that. There are some situations where parents just aren't gonna get it, and that part is really hard and really sucky. To you guys, I would say a couple things. One, find someone to talk to about it, vent about it. I mean, there's a difference between complaining and like talking through how you're feeling, and there's certain circumstances that are out of your control. Find someone you can relate to about it. I think the other thing, in terms of thinking about anxiety, we think of it often, I'm guilty of this too, as sort of a villain. But I want you to think about anxiety as something that's actually trying to protect you. Anxiety is sort of a skewed way that your body learns to try to deal with a perceived threat. Whether that threat is criticism, whether that threat is not feeling good enough or lovable, whether that is something outside of your control and a sense of uncertainty. So I would encourage you to think about, what is my anxiety trying to do for me in this situation? And that can point to what you need around that, which I think is just a great starting point.
I love that. And I love that last part that you said. Anxiety is trying to protect you from something. And maybe even maybe not in the best way, but it's trying to help you. And I love that. And I think that something that, because I've been very open, especially with you guys in our youth ministry, about my struggles with anxiety. And that was a huge part of it, to where we talked about speaking truth over your life, to where anxiety is maybe trying to protect you of, oh, hey, I'm trying to control every situation. And we talked about how anxiety is control and just trying to keep control. And then speaking truth over your life of things like that. I love that. That's so good. And then I think that what can happen is anxiety can get so bad and it can really, really heighten itself to where maybe you are having panic attacks. So I would love for you to even maybe describe what are some of the symptoms of a panic attack, just so that maybe students like you could have maybe had a panic attack and you didn't even know it, or you maybe thought you were having a panic attack, but you weren't. So I would love for you to maybe describe some of the symptoms of a panic attack, and then maybe what to do when you do have one.
Perfect, yeah. That's a really good question. So there's a difference also between a panic attack and an anxiety attack. I'll get to anxiety if I have a moment to. But panic attacks, so this is long and short of it. Oftentimes people describe they feel like they're dying. They can't breathe. They wonder if they're having a heart attack. They start losing sensation and start feeling tingly. You can't catch your breath. You start to maybe have out-of-body feelings. You might start to so the other word for that would be dissociate a little bit, disconnect from the present reality. You might describe, like, those are the main ones. Sweating, again, the really, really rapid heart rate. That is primarily what you would think of when you think of a panic attack. Panic attacks actually, when I'm working with a client who deals with that, the first thing I tell them is, you're not gonna die. It might feel like you're gonna die, but no one has ever died from a panic attack, thankfully. So 2 things. Tell yourself, I'm having a panic attack. So learn your symptoms, learn your signs. If you know that you're someone that deals with that, and you start to notice those kinds of things starting to occur, the sooner you can recognize that and intervene sooner, the better. But tell yourself you're having a panic attack, and then the number one trait, and you can practice this in general, it just helps with anxiety, would be grounding. So basically, when you're having a panic attack, your brain is getting flooded. Your amygdala, the thinking part of your brain, is getting flooded. And so what you want to do is ground yourself in the present by describing your 5 senses. So what are 5 things I can see? 4 things I can feel around me? 3 things I can smell. You just go through each of your 5 senses. The order doesn't matter, the amount doesn't matter, but what that does is that tells your body, in this moment, I am safe. In this moment, I am okay. And that brings you back to the present. So that's panic attack.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a good answer. And I love how practical that is, to where maybe you've experienced some of the things that she's describing. I would say write that down, remember it, describe your 5 senses. Just think, okay, what are 5 things I'm seeing, and just go right down the list. I love that. And then maybe I would love for you to describe an anxiety attack and ways to cope with that as well.
Sure, yeah. So an anxiety attack is going to be a little bit longer in duration. So a panic attack is pretty imminent, short. Anxiety attack is when you're just feeling that overwhelming sense of urgency and discomfort, and it's lasting a long time, and your mind is going 1,000 miles a minute, and you're not necessarily struggling to find your breath, but your heart rate is probably elevated, just things like that. So the 2 things I would say for anxiety attacks, I encourage you to think of your anxiety on a scale from 1 to 10. 10 being the absolute highest, 1 being I'm a step away from being dead, because you need some anxiety to survive, right? So if you're anywhere in that 7 to 10 range on the scale, that's when I want you to take a walk. I want you to distract yourself with something productive. I don't want you to think through or try to logic through the situation. You need a break. Go take some deep breaths. Go do something different for a while. If you are in that 1 to 6 range, that might be where, 1, of course, taking a break can be helpful. Thinking again about how is my anxiety trying to help me in this moment. But the biggest one, so often we try to logic through mental health, but one of the biggest things in coping with mental health is actually your body. So if you can slow down your body and slow down your nervous system, because it thinks it's in fight or flight, it thinks there's a threat, that'll be your best friend. So try this out with me. So everyone put 1 hand on your chest and 1 hand on your stomach. And from there, take a deep breath in and exhale. Okay. I want you to notice which hand moved more. Was it your top hand or your bottom hand? Okay. Those are all my stressed out people. If your top hand is moving more, you're doing chest breathing. That's very shallow breathing. So if you notice yourself doing that, I want you to keep your hand on your stomach and do some deep diaphragm breathing. Try to imagine you have a balloon in your stomach, inflate it and deflate it. Do that for a couple of minutes, and that can actually have a physiological impact on your anxiety. So
I love that. That's so good. Yeah, so practical. And I love something else I want to just even talk about a little further is you said distract yourself with something productive. Yeah. I think that last part is so important, productive, something that's good, something that actually is going to help you. When I was really struggling with anxiety, the thing that was stressing me out the most was basketball. Where are my athletes at? Any athletes in here? So what's funny is basketball you would think would be the release, right? Of oh, I'm not stressed when I'm playing basketball. But when it becomes to be everything you are, and it becomes to be your identity, well, then it begins to stress you out. So for me, playing basketball would have stressed me out more. Going to work out would have stressed me out more. So I actually started doing a lot of other different things, like taking pictures or writing or things like that, or reading. So I would encourage all of you to figure out, hey, what's the thing that when I'm having an anxiety attack and you're above that 7 to 10 level, what's the thing that's going to help calm me down? And I would say a lot of times we probably go to social media, right? We're going to be the old people again. I'm sorry. But social media might not be the best thing to go to when you're anxious, because you're anxious and then all of a sudden you see all your friends vacationing in Tahoe while you're eating cereal at home. And it's now I'm more anxious. And then another thing I think we go to a lot is music. Maybe it's not the best thing to listen to heavy metal if you're stressed out, maybe.
I mean, who
maybe
knows?
Not. Who knows? But it also could be, maybe that's how you relax. But we just encourage you to find something you can run to. At another thing that I get to do, we call it a healthy coping mechanism, which means that there are unhealthy coping mechanisms. So find something that is healthy. And then as we kind of transition a little bit from anxiety, like we said, McKenzie's going to hang out a little bit after, so if you do have any questions, as well as a lot of our leaders are going to be here, so if you have more questions about anxiety, feel free to ask afterwards. But we did also get a lot of questions about anger, and I do want to talk about that. So I guess the first question was, what do you do if you're in a family where it feels like everyone is angry at each other? I think that was a question we got a couple times was, hey, my family's really angry. My family's really, really upset at each other. How would you say that maybe a student, maybe someone who's not in control of that situation, to where a lot of our students can't even drive? Raise your hand if you don't even have your license yet. You're like, I can't drive. I got to get a ride. And everyone's mad. Like, I'm going to be late to practice. But what would you say? How would you maybe tell someone to cope with that?
Totally. That also is a hard situation. I mean, again, if you were in my therapy room, I would sit there and just validate the heck out of you that is really hard and really tense and stressful, right? Like, you feel that energy can breed. You feel like you're walking around on eggshells constantly. So starting with the how to think about it, anger, and I'm so glad you guys had a whole night on this, but anger gets a bad rap. Anger is an emotion, just like all the other ones. God experienced and expresses anger, right? And so just being mindful of villainizing anger. Secondly, anger is what we call a secondary emotion, meaning it is a response to another feeling. And usually it's pain or fear. So just the other day, I was with my sister and she was with my niece, and a biker came and almost hit my niece. And when I tell you, my sister went off on her. And my dad just kept trying to be like, just calm down. It's fine. It's over. And I just looked at her, and proud therapist moment, I was like, I bet you were really scared she was going to get hit by that bike. And my sister just deflated, right? So just recognizing that anger is probably a reflection of something else. And that can just help you understand better what's happening. That doesn't mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that you need to tolerate people being inappropriately angry towards you. That is not an excuse, right? You can understand where they're coming from, and they don't need to treat you that way. That being said, come to therapy. If your family's open to it, we would talk about what are fair fighting rules, how can we validate. A lot of times we just need some validation of, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. I want to understand what you're experiencing. But I'm going to take a step back with that and just remind you that you are the kids in this situation. You are not the parents. It is not your job to fix the family problems. That's mom and dad's job, okay? So that is not your burden to carry. With that discomfort, I think it goes back to those coping skills, right? Like finding things, if you need to take some time to be in your room, connect with your friends. Sometimes there's those situations where it's minimizing time at home if it's gonna be really stressful and uncomfortable. That's a really hard one, but hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, I love that, and I want to even double down on. I love what you said. It's not your job to fix. I think that a lot of times, especially I remember being in middle school and high school, and something would go wrong, and it's like, well, I have to fix it, or this is my fault, or. But what I want to encourage you guys is, you're the kids. You're 12. You're probably not going to be able to figure out all of the issues. That's not your job. What is your job? To understand that you're validated in your feelings. And we even talked about that last week of, hey, it's okay to be angry. Like, not anything that you're hearing from either me or McKenna or anyone else as they begin to preach, we're not going to tell you the way that you feel is wrong. You're not going to hear that from us. But what we are going to tell you is that, hey, just because you might visit an emotion, that doesn't mean that you have to live there. And I love that. I love that you even talked about the secondary emotion of, hey, you're responding to something. So maybe if you're in here and we had even some students last week who were vulnerable and raised their hand and said, hey, I'm struggling with anger. I'm upset. What I want to encourage you is to just think that when you're that angry, because a lot of times you're so angry, you're like, I don't know what to do, and I don't even know how to respond. Maybe you respond that way of, hey, I'm either really scared right now, and that's why I'm angry, or I'm in a lot of pain right now, and that's why I'm angry. So I love that. That's so good. And then another question, and then I'm gonna ask maybe one or two more questions that weren't turned in because I feel like they're super important as we're sitting up here. But I think that I'll end with that question. But I do want to take a moment and talk about depression. There wasn't a lot of questions turned in about depression, but I feel like the reason why is because maybe a lot of students are struggling with it and don't know how to maybe bring it up. So I do feel like we should maybe talk about it. What advice would you give to someone who's maybe struggling with depression? And then I also love how you kind of described, hey, this is anxiety attack. This is a panic attack. Could you maybe describe, I know we don't call them maybe depression attacks, but could you maybe describe?
Episodes.
Yes. Could you maybe describe what that feels like to
Totally.
a student? Because you might even be dealing with it and not really know. And then could you maybe give us and the students some coping mechanisms of, hey, how do I deal with this?
Totally, yeah. Depression's an interesting one, and I'm so glad that Paige is going to be talking about it more because I'm sure she'll do a lot of justice to the topic. Depression's an interesting one because it's one of those conditions where the condition itself is often what prevents people from getting help. So depression often looks like low energy, beyond what's normal, right? You guys are teenagers. You need about as much sleep as toddlers, truly. You can tell your parents I said that when they're giving you a hard time about sleeping in. Anyway, it can look like fatigue, low energy. A lot of times it looks like withdrawing. You're just not as interested in hanging out with people. You're just not as interested in doing things that you normally like to do. Maybe the things that you used to love and bring you a lot of joy actually bring you not a whole lot of emotion, maybe some emptiness and flatness. People often describe feeling kind of like they're in a cloud or in a fog. And mentally, this one often looks like feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, thoughts of suicide, whether that's just, I wish I was dead and what's the point, to I want to end my life. And it can also look like a lot of what we would call like existential crisis. So, oh my gosh, what's the meaning of life and what's the purpose of all of this and what's everything happening and why do I exist? And like experiencing a lot of anxiety around that. It can happen cyclically, so like lasting a couple weeks or more at a time, and then maybe you feel better for a time. Some people just kind of have like a low-grade depression that just kind of persists. You can function. It doesn't really impact your daily life that much, but it's definitely there. And yeah, again, you're wanting to look for things that are impacting your quality of life and overall well-being. In terms of coping, so unlike anxiety, we do a lot of like validating, what are you feeling? Anxiety can often be a reflection of unprocessed emotion that you've kind of pushed down. With depression, we want to validate the feelings, but it's not helpful to sit in that spin. So if I'm working with a client who's struggling with depression, I'm not going to spend 50 minutes validating, yeah, that's really hard, because it's just going to keep that cycle going. So what I would actually encourage for anyone struggling with depression, these are my basic kind of self-care essentials. And I know self-care gets hijacked often to mean like, oh, I go buy myself a $300 pair of shoes or something. But it's just taking care of your essentials. Am I showering? Am I bathing? Am I making sure I'm eating consistently? Because a lot of times depression, we just forget to eat. Am I taking care of illness? Am I avoiding mood-altering drugs and substances that can maybe impact? Things like alcohol, that's a depressant. It's going to make it worse. And then the biggest thing is what we call, it's simple but so hard. If you deal with depression, I feel you, but it's called opposite action. And it's literally, what is your urge? Do the opposite. You want to isolate yourself? Go call a friend. You want to sit around and just kind of like sit on your phone for 5 hours? Go on a walk around the block. It doesn't have to be long. Tell yourself, I have a client where she tells herself, okay, I'm going to agree to go for 5 minutes. And if I really am miserable on this walk, I'll go home. But if I can do another 5 minutes, I will. So getting moving. And then a lot of that too is about your thought process, right? Like, what are these, I'll frame it this way. How you think about things impacts how you feel, which impacts how you behave. So as a therapist, I'm gonna wanna sit with you and talk about, how are you thinking right now? Like this hopelessness, this I'm alone, I'm not good enough, I'm inadequate. I'm gonna help challenge the heck out of that. And we're gonna reinforce new thought patterns that are gonna help with that as well. But that, I could go on for hours on that one.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so good. I love, what did you call it? The opposite?
Opposite action.
Opposite action. I love that. And the reason why, two things you said was not to live there. I feel like that's a phrase that you guys are probably tired of me saying, but I say it a lot, is like, hey, you can visit places, but you just can't live there. And I love that. And I love that. The opposite action, what does it remind me? It reminds me, okay, depression is a feeling. It's an emotion. It's something that I'm going to feel, but I actually can choose to get out of it. Yes. And I just want to encourage all of you guys that a lot of what tonight is we're not trying to say, hey, we have the cure for anxiety, or hey, we have the cure for depression. What are we saying? We're saying that you actually can be empowered, and you can know that, hey, just because you're feeling these emotions, that doesn't have to be the end of your story. I love that you even brought up suicide, and I have the opportunity to kind of talk to even some parents of people whose children have committed suicide. And I was talking to a parent who does the same kind of thing because his son committed suicide, and he said all of the parents say the exact same thing, and they all say, man, I just wish I would have known. Mm-hmm. They just say, I wish they would have told me. I wish they would have felt okay to tell me. And then he'll even talk to children who have attempted suicide, and it didn't work. And what did they say? He even asks them, hey, what could you tell any student that's struggling with depression to the point that they want to end their life? He asks these students who have tried to end their life, and they just couldn't, or it didn't work, or things happened and they were stopped. And he says, what could you tell them? And he says, every student says the same thing. He says, tell them that it gets better. Mm-hmm. He says, tell them that there's light at the end of the tunnel, that this doesn't have to be the end of their story, that if you get help, there are things that you can do. And we're gonna put resources up. I know I've said it before, but I want to encourage you guys, if that's you and you feel like you're in this dark spot, I want you to know that there are students who have actually attempted suicide and it didn't happen, and they immediately were like, wow, it gets better. I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish. And then suicide is one of those things that after you do it, you can't undo it, right. So I would encourage you to really get help, to really share, to find someone that you can talk to a therapist, to expose it. I truly believe exposure brings healing. When you expose something, you can begin to be healed from it. But if I have a broken bone and I don't go to the doctor, guess what? My bone's probably gonna stay broken. So I would encourage you guys to do that. But just two more questions.
Can I add to that real quick?
Yeah, for sure.
So just to throw out there, if I can encourage you to think about suicide as a very permanent solution to a temporary problem. Wow. Your depression will and can get better. So I just have to throw that out there.
No, that's amazing. Awesome. And then the second to last question. So maybe you're in here and you're not struggling with some of those things. Maybe you're in here and we've been talking and you're like, hey, I don't really struggle with that. But you have friends that do. I would love to even see maybe a show of hands. You don't have to point at them if they're in the room, obviously. Please don't, I beg you. But maybe raise your hand if you've ever had a friend and it's like, hey, I've struggled with anything that we've talked about, being angry, anxiety, depression. Raise your hand for me. Yeah, you don't have to expose them. You don't have to point at them. But raise your hand if someone said, oh, I had anything. A question that got turned in, and you can put your hands down, is how do I help others with their emotions, especially maybe even at a young age to where you don't have all the answers? How do I help someone without maybe getting burnt out myself or weighing down on myself and trying to still help them in a healthy way?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good question. Whoever wrote that in, I was like, is that me from when I was in high school? Because I struggled with that. So this is a really great question. So we have this phrase or saying as therapists, which is you can't work harder than your client, right? So sometimes I'm a recovering people pleaser. I'm a recovering fixer. I want to come in and I want to make it all better. I see you in pain and I just want to take it all away because it makes me sad and makes me uncomfortable and I care about you and I don't want to see you struggling, right? So being mindful of, I distinguish it, this is kind of like this is very an adult concept, but you guys have some nuanced questions, so I know you're gonna get this. It's the difference between being responsible to your friends, but not for your friends. Wow. And what I mean by that is, you have a responsibility to be kind, to be caring, to be supportive of people, but you do not have responsibility to make them okay and to fix their problems and to resolve it all for them. So if you're noticing your friends are going through something and it's stirring up a lot of anxiety for you, you're feeling burnt out and trying to help them, I would encourage you to check in with what's going on for you. Like, how are my boundaries with this? Yeah. Am I taking over responsibility for them? Because I will not be good for anybody if I don't have good boundaries and I'm burnt out. I'm not going to be able to help you anyway, right? So with that, validate, encourage, just say, I hear what you're saying. That makes so much sense that you feel that way. Most of the time, that's primarily what people need, right? Just validate how they're feeling and what they're experiencing. The second thing, if you're feeling after that sort of an impulse, like I want to do more, ask, what do you need from me? Yeah. What would be helpful from me right now? Like, give them that chance. Maybe it's like, hey, do you need space? Do you need to talk about it? Do you need a distraction? Those are the 3 questions that I ask my husband. Do you need space? Do you need to talk about it? Do you need a distraction, right? And leaving it at that point and pointing them to other people, adults, leaders, if you're feeling like it's beyond your capacity.
Come on, that's so good. I love that. And yeah, I want to just double down, and I love that statement that you said, be responsible to your friends, but you're not responsible for your friends. And I know that I personally am a fixer. Like, I'm like, I just want to fix everything. But I love that you're even saying, hey, our job, even as adults, our job and our role is not to fix. Our job is to validate. Our job is to support. Our job is to be there for people. So if you have a friend that's struggling with that, definitely, I would definitely apply all the things that McKenna just said. And then I even would say, if it's to the point, and McKenna, I'd love for you to even just kind of talk about this as well, and we'll have some hotlines up there as well, but at what point do you say, okay, this is when I should get help? I feel like that's something that I've at least noticed a lot of students struggle with, is this just something, oh, they're just going through something, I don't know if it's to the point where I need to tell someone, I feel like I should, but what if I don't, and I'm not their friend anymore, and it really wasn't that big of a deal? How would you maybe say, like, is the line of, hey, no, I need to tell a parent, I need to tell a leader, I need to tell even a school counselor or a teacher? What would you say that point is?
No, absolutely. A couple things, that is, again, a very hard one. And I think if you're worried, for example, that your friends are going to hurt themselves or are making threats of hurting somebody else, or you're worried about safety, or you're noticing, trust your gut sometimes, right? Like, if you've got that anxiety, anxious feeling and you're just feeling like this is really big and a lot, my encouragement is to talk to a school counselor or an adult leader, of course. Someone here I think would be fantastic. Keeping in mind that school counselors are confidential, right? So, like, you are entitled to a level of confidentiality. That student, that friend of yours, if they get called in to talk to the school counselor, right? That's gonna stay private and confidential unless there's an imminent safety concern going on. So kind of leaning into that. And then other people might disagree with this, but where I stand, I would rather lose a friendship than potentially have that person die. So that's kind of where I stand on that.
Yeah. No, I love that. And the last thing we say before we kind of get into the last question, and David, you can come on up and play as we begin to close. But something that I love that I feel like you're even kind of hinting at is there's no such thing as too soon. I feel like there's only such thing as too late. To where you'll never, I feel like, expose maybe, hey, this person's struggling. Like worst case scenario, it is nothing. And it's fine. And your friend's mad at you for a little bit, but a lot of times I feel like they get over it, you know? Or if they don't, well, I'm sorry. I was trying to save your life. I feel like that's maybe okay. But I've heard a lot of stories of, hey, it was too late. I wish I would have told someone sooner. I wish I could have gotten help sooner. So I would encourage you guys of just even that. Hey, it's never too soon, but there is such thing as too late. There is such thing as waiting too long. And if you have that anxiety, that gut feeling of, oh man, I don't know fully what this is. I don't know how this is going to end for my friend. I'm actually afraid for my friend's life. We want to encourage you, get help. Talk to a school counselor. Talk to a parent. Figure out a way, because it's never too late. It's never too soon, but it can always be too late. And then the last question as we begin to close is if you could tell one thing to every student that's struggling with their mental health, maybe, and I'm sure there's a lot of us in here who are struggling with at least one of the things we talked about. Totally. I would just say, hey, if you could tell this student one thing, what would it be?
I'm gonna cheat and say two things. I'm gonna say you are not alone. So often I have people come in and say to me, like, I'm dealing with X, Y, and Z, and I feel crazy, and I feel like no one else gets it. People get it. You're not crazy. I promise you're not crazy. What you're dealing with is probably normal within the context of what you're dealing with. So that, and then secondly, and I kind of mentioned this to the leaders earlier, I find that people err on two sides. Either they don't talk to anybody about what they're going through because they feel like they're a burden. That's kind of an identity that they've taken on. Or they over-identify with their mental health and they become their anxiety, they become their depression. And to you, I would just say, that is not your identity. You are a person who struggles with depression, with anxiety. It is not who you are, and you are absolutely valid and worthy of needing help. You are not a burden, and you are not alone.
I love that. Come on, that is not your identity. Can we give it up for McKenna? Come on, we can stand to our feet.